Yeah. Catch a vision for what God wants to do in your community, not just in your church, but in your community. And communicate that vision, communicate the why to your church. This is what we're here for. We have words plastered on our exit doors as add value to the city. Like, don't just hold what you have here in the church, take it out, communicate the vision to your people, tell them to bring that excitement to the neighborhoods, communities around you, workplaces, all of those things. Learn to communicate vision. If you can, weave the vision into every message to keep the vision at the forefront of people in the church, to help them latch onto it. And then lastly, be consistent. And consistency builds commitment. So if you have those values, if you have those standards, if you have those expectations, hold people to them. It'll help bring in high impact, high value leaders. It'll help attract and help keep them. If you build that consistency, it'll keep that commitment.
Hey, welcome to the Revitalized Church podcast. Today, we're talking about one of the most important things that you as a revitalizing pastor need to know, and that's building a team. We are not meant to do this on our own. If you even look at the life of Jesus, he surrounded himself with a team of disciples that helped him. They encouraged him. They were there with him through all the different things that he went through. Teams are very important and they are vital to your ministry. We've got to learn to trust them, to empower them, and to release them to go out and help us do this. Pastor Rob Miller is with me today. He's built an incredible team down at Reclamation Church. I know you'll enjoy this. Stay tuned, watch it all the way through, and I hope you'll be blessed by it. Here we go to the interview with Pastor Rob Miller. Hey, Rob, thanks so much for joining us today. Man, I'm excited about having you here. I've been wanting to do an episode about teams, and man, you are you're really emphasizing that at your church right now. I know you got some training coming up there. But before we jump into all that, introduce yourself if you wouldn't mind. Tell everybody, who is Rob Miller? Tell us about your family and your church, a little bit about how you got there and where you are now.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So Rob Miller, been here at Reclamation Church down in Spring Lake, North Carolina since June 2018. So just over 6 years now. My dad actually planted this church in 2003 at downtown Spring Lake, not too far from where we're currently located. We moved here to this current facility in 2006, 2007. Used to be a big tractor trailer repair shop. So lots of renovations had to go into making this building an actual worship space. Mm-hmm. And so here we are a few years later, down the road. Dad actually stepped away from the ministry back in March of 2018. And so we assumed pastoral role in June 2018. So I've been here from the very start, from the very beginning when I was a church plant. So I've got that church plant experience. Matter of fact, my dad has planted 6 different churches across the world. He's got one in England, one in Belgium, 2 down in Puerto Rico, 1 down in Louisiana, this one here. I mean, he's just a church planter. So I grew up in that kind of atmosphere, that environment, a church planting environment. He was also in the military. So I grew up a military kid. I ended up joining the military myself in 2008. So all kind of experience in ministry all over the world. Germany, where we were intern pastors, assistant pastors, moved over to Colorado in 2014, where we joined another church plant and helped them set up church every single Sunday in a school, and spent 3 years with them. That church is now thriving. Life Chapel Church out in Colorado Springs, doing an incredible job, Pastor Brian Merritt. And now we're here. Fast forward a few years to 2018 and now to 2024. And it feels, honestly, you can ask a lot of people who come in, people who've been to church all of their life, or people who are now joining our teams or staff. They're like, it has that church plant feel. And I think that's because when we first came in, we had around 40 to 50 people in our church when we first started pastoring in June 2018. Now we run anywhere from 250 to 300. And it's just coming into that small church mentality of having to implement these systems and processes and things that help progress the ministry, grow the ministry to where it's at right now. I think it really does have that church plant feel, which is great. I think it helps set the tone, sets the culture of the church. We're not really set to tradition. We're not really set to any practices or things. We're constantly changing. I think if you're going to grow, any organism that's going to grow has to be willing to change. And so because we don't have anything really set or anchored to history, other than the foundation that we've been able to build on with, my dad planting the church 20 years ago, it gives us that flexibility, that freedom to kind of move and implement change as we need to. And so it's been an incredible learning experience. I mean, 2 years
Mm-hmm.
in, COVID hit. And so
Right,
that was a
right.
whole nother reset that we had to do. We've adopted, I guess you could say, or we've been adopted by mentors and training and all kinds of things that we've tried to implement right before COVID hit. And that was just, everything just wiped it off the whiteboard, right? We had a whole plan and strategy. Right. A month later, COVID hit. And so it's like, man, here we go back to the drawing board to see what this looks like. Coming out of COVID, we had like 40 people again. So it was a reset all over.
Yeah.
And so just, it's been learning. A lot of learning. I don't think we have yet stopped learning, and leaders are learners. And so we've got a couple of mentors that we reach out to every month. We've got some training things that we go to, that we subscribe to, Breaking 200, anything Carrie Newhoff, anything Craig Rochelle. All of those are incredible resources that have helped in the last few years. And now here we are, and our teams are growing. Our leadership team we've got a leadership team of about 12 people. And it's solid. It's set, man. We actually love our team. It's incredible. They're amazing.
Right.
We love serving alongside of them. And that was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, a lot of tears getting to where we're at right now. Matter of fact, our leadership team as a whole has probably changed 4 times since we began pastoring in 2018. And this one has been solid for a good year and a half. Now, part of that is also, we're in a military town. Fort Liberty, used to be Fort Bragg, is right down the road. So it's a very transient community. We have a lot of military people, which is my experience, that's near and dear to my heart, ministry of the military, ministering to people that are PCSing in here, out of here in 2 to 3 years. What does that reset look like? And so we've had to navigate a lot of transitions. But I think our current leadership team as a whole is like, we're set, we're stable, we're ready to go. And, we're all running alongside of each other. It's awesome. It's incredible. It's a good season for us right now.
Awesome, man. That's a lot of information to dive into. And first off,
it's a lot.
what a case study there of you were a part of the first church plant there. You were a son of the church, brought up in the plant, you know what I'm saying? Not just taking one, and then you take it yourself, and then you start making major changes. Yeah. And so that's an interesting dynamic there. One taking over from dad, of, hey, you still got to make it your own leadership style. You've got to,
that was a huge tension point for me personally, not for my dad, but for me. When he actually asked me 3 times if we wanted to come and pastor here, and I told dad, I was like, no, I don't think we want to do that. I feel the Lord calling us to go and plant a church, because that's been my experience. I've been part of church plant all my life. I was like, we're going to go plant a church. And on his resignation Sunday, when he was while he's giving his sermon, we came and visited. And I can point to the seat right here in the church where we were sitting. And the Lord just began to show me, what ministry could look like here at what was called Sand Hills Worship Center at the time. And so I told my dad, I was like, look, I think we can do this. I think we want to do this. I was like, but dad, I got to let you know, like, we've learned a lot in the last few years since I joined the Army and moved away, learned it. Different ministry experiences around the world. I was like, we've learned a lot. And I think if we're going to come in and be the pastor, there's going to be some changes that happen. And I love what my dad said. He had full support for us. He's like, listen, it's not my church. It's God's church. You're going to be the leader. You're going to be the pastor. You do what God is calling you to do. You lead with the vision that he's given you. And so that just gave us a lot of freedom, and really just, it eased that tension for us, and allowed us to come in and really just lead as how we felt God was telling us to lead, showing us to lead. Yeah.
And, just a sidetrack on your dad, like, I've seen him working in a lot of different people's ministries and lives. And there's people that, as you're talking, that are coming to mind that I know that he sowed into their life. I've got some really good friends that are still connected with him. And that's a church planter's heart. If you said this is his 6th church, a lot of people will plant a church and then they're there forever.
Right.
And so, you were a church planter. Now you're I don't know what a term to call it. I don't want to, church manager, or you're just a pastor. Yeah. But that planning spirit of, like your dad's got, he's always looking for that next opportunity.
Absolutely.
And so that's really cool. I love that. But, so that willingness to change, how is that something that was there when you went there? You don't have to get into any of this. I don't want to cause any problems, just throwing that disclaimer out there. Or did you have to, some pastors have to preach culture change for a while, you know what I'm saying? Because you gotta show that burden, you gotta increase that desire to reach the lost and get that hungry. Was that desire for that change there then? Were they wanting to do some things, or did you have to kind of do some encouraging there?
Yeah, let me define what it is now. Here we are 6.5 years, six years and a few months later. and I think we have 2 or 3 families remaining that was there the first Sunday that we came in. So there was a lot of fall off.
Right.
My parents have an incredible ministry. The way that they do things is awesome. It's incredible. But, Adrian and I just do things a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of people weren't ready for that. And I think anytime you're going to implement change, here's the lessons I've learned, right? I came in as a young pastor, guns blazing. I was like, we're going to do this, we're going to change this, change that, right?
Yeah.
And
hey, guilty right here.
Right. At first glance, the people seem to be on board. Well, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. But the moment you start implementing it, it's like, oh, I don't like that, because people don't really like change when they're set in a certain way. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so, and that's kind of one thing that I'm learning with church growth and implementing any kind of change or any kind of systems or any kind of innovation. There's going to be a period of a drop off. Not everybody can go with you into the next season.
That's right.
And so that's, as a young pastor, when you're coming in, you're hoping to see a church grow and people start leaving, and it's doing the opposite of what you want. You kind of get a little disheartened. And that's when I started reaching out to mentors and other pastors who have experience with it. And they really poured into us, really encouraged us, helped us to learn to pump the brakes a little bit and implement change at a slower rate. But the biggest part of, the biggest success, if you could call it that, of implementing change is really communicating the why. Why are we doing this? Yeah. What we were doing before was working, and it was working. But it's only going to work to a certain level or work to a certain standard. But if you want to see growth, if you want to break that wall, if you want to break those barriers, I mean, you've got to implement some change to get there. There's an incredible resource. I wish I could think of it off the top of my head of what it's actually called, but it's actually prevalent in business growth models, not just church growth models. But it's called the S curve. I don't know if you've ever heard of the S curve.
The Sigma.
Yeah. So most churches kind of grow in like a plateau. They hit a certain level and then they kind of level off, and then 70 years from now they kind of fade away. Unfortunately, that's how a lot of people see church growth. We hit a certain level, that's it. This is as high as we're going to get. Now let's anchor to where we're at right now, and that just becomes our identity forever. Whereas actual church growth, business growth, whatever you want to call it, should have more of an S, where it kind of it inclines. There's that exponential growth, but eventually it's going to cap out, and eventually start either plateauing or even declining,
or coming back down.
Right. So before you even get to that crest, before you even get to the climax, the peak, as a leader, you've got to have that vision for where you're going into the next season, into the next level. Like, how do we get to that next level? And so as you're climbing up the ladder or up the growth before you even get to the crest, then you start talking and communicating, hey, these are some things that are going to be on the horizon. These are some things that you need to implement soon. Some changes that we're going to bring in. And that kind of is called the innovation period, right? And then, as you implement the innovation period, you're going to have some fall off because not everybody's going to go with you. And there's going to be a period of kind of a little bit of decline, but as it kicks in, it's going to pick back up. And, looking over the last few years, I had just thought, hey, let me go back and just look, our church growth over the years and, put the numbers in, and you could see like S curve where it kind of, it's really cool. It's really cool to see.
I think more guys need to do that. I did that for our church. I went back to the earliest I could find was 1987.
Yeah.
And plugged in all the tithes and attendance. And we make real clear on here that we don't judge church health off of that.
Right.
But man, you can learn a lot of things from those periods of what were we doing here, what was happening, what's going on. And even since I've been here, the spikes and the declines. And if anybody wants to, Mark Rutland does a really good speech on that, on the S curve. That's a good resource. I'm glad you brought that up, because at those plateaus, I imagine that's where you saw, I don't want to get ahead of where we're going on teams, but I imagine that's where you saw some changes and some updates and that. So you talked about that, about the loneliness that when those people can leave, right? That's me as a pastor, man, when you got people walking out the door because you're making changes, that's a hard time. You feel lonely, but it helps to have that team around you. And that's one of the things that I love in sports and baseball and everything else that I've played and done. When you lose together. When you win together, but you help carry that load. So let's start out. Tell us about your teams, where you're at, and so we know where you are, and then we'll talk about how we can get there.
Yeah. So here at Reclamation Church, I think we have like 15 to 18 different teams. And really if I can kind of explain why we got that many, why we have that many, is we want to create a space for an opportunity for anybody to get plugged in and serve. So oftentimes people come and say, hey, I want to do this. And that wasn't even something that we were even considering or looking at, like, hey, I want to, I don't know, just random stuff. And it's like, yeah, let's do that. Let's fit this under this team, under that team. And now you can be this team leader. And really what has happened is, Adrian and I, even in our leadership team, have paid more attention, to spiritual growth in people instead of numerical growth. Numerical growth is a byproduct of spiritual growth, right? As people are becoming more mature disciples, they're going to invite more people. They're going to be excited about it. It brings that motivation. It brings that encouragement, and just they, motivated people invite people. Mm-hmm. And so we start identifying, what people are paying attention to, what they're passionate about. If I can give an example, our current hospitality team directors, Gabe and Rachel, they got saved 2.5 years mm-hmm. ago here in Reclamation Church. Now they're hospitality directors. Like, they're in charge of all of the hospitality. They're 22 years old. They're mm-hmm. young, but they're leading.
Right.
And really how that happened was I noticed Gabe and Rachel every Sunday service that they would just randomly start picking things up, trash, resetting mm-hmm. the chairs in the room. If I had, we don't keep the pulpit on the platform. So our worship team has room to worship and everything. We move it up and down as we go up to preach. At the end of our first service, he would just walk up there, grab the pulpit, take it off the stage without even asking. Like, he would just do these things. He has an eye for it. And so I talked to Gabe and Rachel. I was like, I see you have an eye for these things. What would you do? Like, would you consider praying about actually leading a team who every Sunday, like, you're encouraging them because you have the eye for it already. You have the vision for it. So you already have the expectation. You already have the standard of what it should look like. What would you consider, like, leading that team and recruiting people to join you to become a part of that team? And now they're crushing. I mean, they're 22, 23 years old, and they're incredibly mature disciples of Christ, and they're recruiting people to their teams and they're holding people to a higher standard. It's incredible. And so, we just look for those things. What are people paying attention to? What are they passionate about? Just understanding people, knowing the people that are with you. I think we talked about 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 mm-hmm. last week or a few days ago. Like, know those who labor among you.
Right.
We can get into this trapped mindset, especially in church with volunteering and serving, where it becomes transactional, right? Mm-hmm. Hey, you should be here on Sunday because you need to serve. But what about Monday through Saturday? How are we checking in on our people? How are we building the relational aspect of discipleship and community, right? And so, that's just changed how we do everything. Understanding and knowing the people, knowing their passions, and getting them plugged into where they're passionate about, where they see things happening in the church. And when you can get somebody plugged into what they're passionate about, man, they want to serve. They want to do it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. I listened to Jensen Franklin the other day, and he was talking about his staff at his church. He said the majority of the people we have on staff here are people that were members, and we saw what they were doing and got to the point we realized we need them and offered them paid jobs or offered them different levels of positions. And so it's awesome when you start seeing that, but that requires an eye from you. Like you said, you gotta recognize that.
Yeah. You got to pay attention to the people, right?
Yeah. Hey, and how did that get done? I love that there's an episode of The Office. Like, I don't know if anybody else that's watching this podcast loves The Office.
I love The Office.
Oh man, I do too. One of the best episodes to me about this is when Michael fires Dwight, and Dwight's working at, I think it's Staples or somewhere like that, and it's showing Dwight out there, like, trying to sell printers at Staples. And all of a sudden Michael's tree dies. And he was like, what's going on with my tree? And they were like, he said, who's been taking care of this thing? Who looks after my, I think it's one of them ficus trees or whatever like that. He's like, I thought the cleaning people did it, or I thought Pam did it. And they were like, no, man, Dwight looked after that for you. Like, he didn't even know, you got to recognize those things of who's doing stuff in the background. Man, I'm going to have to make a sermon about that and preach about the Dwights one day.
Come on.
But no, man, that's important to recognize that. And so now you've got 15 to 18 different teams. Right. Each one of those, each one of them has a team leader, has their own support staff, basically.
We're getting there. So right now, the 12 core leadership, if you want to call it that, the 12 that we meet with every Tuesday for our staff meetings, are over all of these teams.
Okay.
So for example, we have a host team, and I know host team sounds like the service, hosting the service or anything like that. We call our host team the people-oriented people. So it's going to be our door greeters, it's the parking lot people, it's the ushers. We call them hosts that walk people to their seats, because they're people oriented, and we've identified, hey, you're like super outgoing, you're super extroverted, you love talking to people. This space would be great for you to serve in, and they love it. They do an incredible job. Our hospitality team, on the other hand, because that sounds more like it would be the same concept, door greeters and everything. Our hospitality team, on the other hand, is more task oriented. So Gabe and Rachel are incredible, but they're not really people oriented; they're more task oriented. And so our hospitality team is the room reset. If I have incredible or a crazy illustration, Gabe resets the whole platform for the next service. They're resetting the room. They're cleaning out the trash. They're cleaning the bathrooms. They're more task oriented. They're kind of more behind the scenes. And so we find those task oriented people who are like, hey, what did you consider, working and serving on, a hospitality team? We have our discipleship team. We have our youth team, our kids teams. And all of these have like sub teams underneath them. And we're getting to the point, there's different seasons or different levels of church growth. You have the family church, the pastor-led church, pastor-driven church, staff-driven church, corporate church, quasi-mega church, all of these different levels of church. And so we're basically, based on our size, we're moving into the staff-driven church, but we're also still very pastor-driven. And so I'm delegating more and more to these team leaders, and I'm expecting them to do the exact same. Listen, y'all need to start delegating more downward to your teams and empowering leaders. That's what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be developing leaders, right? Disciples make disciples.
Yeah.
Right. And so kind of developing those things. I learned this a couple of days ago, and actually I told it to I shared it with our leadership team yesterday in our staff meeting. And it deals with that relational aspect, knowing your people. And so our leaders now are going to be every Monday calling everybody on their team and asking if you have too many people, if you feel like you have too many people to reach out to, then you have too many people.
Right.
And so you need to start developing those leaders to delegate those things to, like Moses, right?
Like Moses, I'm understanding, just like Moses.
Yeah, yep. Absolutely. And I looked at my team leaders. I'm like, look, I pour into you 12. Jesus had his 12. I'm pouring into you 12. There's no way. I think we have like 150 volunteers listed on our planning center services. I was like, there's no way I can reach out to 150 people in a week and build meaningful conversations and actually get to know them. I just can't. As the pastor, I can't.
Right.
And so, that's where I rely on you guys to pour into your teams and connect with your teams. And so you need to do the same. You need to start developing team leaders under you, which should be, we're getting there. It's easier to do. Sometimes people say it's easier said than done. Actually, I think it is pretty easy. And we're helping them identify those people, to step up on those sub teams. And we've already started establishing 2 or 3 leaders already. And that helps drive motivation. It drives ownership. It drives encouragement, just a desire to be in the house. You're entrusting me with this leadership. Yeah, absolutely. You can do it. Now, well, I'm going to go invite more people because now I have ownership in the process of the church and the growth of the church.
Yeah. And I think you touched on a point, and I want to make sure we define that for everybody. I mean, most of the pastors that are watching this will know this, but we talk about leading teams and developing team leaders and those are disciples. It's just our modern word for it. Is somebody that's going out and building their team, like a team leader and teamwork. Those are disciples. We're doing the Great Commission. And so, I think that's awesome that you've got this going. Now you answered something I was about to ask. How many volunteers do you think you have, active volunteers in your church? Do you think you have?
I checked yesterday. We have 145, 150.
So I was wondering if you went, so you're a little bit ahead of the ratio. And one of the big reasons of building teams in a church is that, it's normally for every volunteer you have 4 members.
Yep.
And so it's normally that 1 to 4. So you're a little bit ahead of that, basically, more people active and volunteering, but that's another reason to build your team.
Right. I think it goes to who are actively serving on Sunday. So we have 145, 150 volunteers in a pool, basically, to pull from, to schedule every week. Right.
Right.
That's one thing that we shifted to. We shifted away from counting attendance on Sunday. We do it because we have to report, but we don't put the emphasis on how many people are attending. We've started putting the emphasis and calculating how many people are serving on Sunday, because that's, like you said, that's a disciple. Here at Reclamation Church, we define a disciple as two parts. One, they share in responsibility, and two, they grow in relationship. They share in responsibility, they grow in relationship. Well, what does that look like for us here at Reclamation Church? They serve on a team and they join a small group. So they're growing in relationship with the community of the church, and they're serving on a team by sharing in responsibility. I like to think of it as, Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is probably the most amazing day of the year, except for Christmas. I just love Thanksgiving. It's amazing. I love the food.
Yeah.
What happens on Thanksgiving? Families come together, families from all over the nation, all over the state, however you want to say it, see it. And they all come together, and they're all pitching in. They're all serving in some way, shape, or form. We go to my parents' house, and my wife is helping my mom. My sister is helping my mom. My sister-in-law is helping my mom in the kitchen, cooking all the food. All the guys are out grilling or out doing something. We're all spending time together doing something. When the food is over, we're helping to clear the table. We're washing the dishes. We're all taking part. We're sharing in responsibility because we're a family, and that's what family does. We moved away from the dream team title, and now we're calling ourselves the Serve family. We're a family. We want to be there for each other. Now, understanding that, there's also the challenge, because one of the hardest people to serve is your brother and your sister. One of the hardest people to serve sometimes is your sibling, right? Yeah. And so you just have to, it's just kind of navigating, what does that look like to serve the Lord and to serve his bride? Just kind of navigating it. It's a challenge. I mean, working with people is going to be messy because people are messy. But it's definitely a process. It's you've got to be committed to the process, and consistent with expectations and everything. Yeah.
All right. So that process, you've got it set in place now. You've got a structure, you're building, and you've kind of get some momentum. You know what I'm saying? Momentum is a very hard thing to get started. A lot of times we're in the opposite way. And so not only are we trying to get something moving, we're trying to correct the wrong direction, so we're trying to stop that rock that's rolling downhill and start going back uphill and get some momentum going. Right. So you talked about, when you came in, you had 40 to 50 people. Within a couple of years, I imagine you had just about had that complete turnover like you're talking about. You have just a few families left. So let's talk about a pastor now that, let's say, is in that second, third year. They've come in, they've had that major, because that's typically when that turnover is going to happen, is you've got your honeymoon for the first year. Everything's going great. And then all of a sudden those numbers start dropping. That's when that S curve goes up and starts coming downhill. And they feel like they can't stop that drop, right? They've got all new people. And, one of the hard things I faced in ministry is when you bring in all these new people is building that trust with them, because you're turning over something that you're going to catch the responsibility for. It all boils down to the pastor. When something goes wrong, we know it. So that pastor that's been there 2 or 3 years, he's had a major turnover in his church because he's leading towards the vision that God's got. Everybody hasn't seen that. But what's interesting is typically the numbers stay the same. So let's say he started out with 40. He's probably still got 40, but it's a new 40.
It's different, yeah.
But he does it. But now he's got to create a team. It's time that, he realizes he's got to have that. So how do you navigate that? Now you're dealing with that transition. You're dealing with the new people leaving, and you're trying to build a team that you don't have. Where do you start with that? What did it look like for you, and what advice would you have for somebody doing that now?
Yeah. One thing that was taught to us from one of our mentors, think of Ezekiel 37, the valley of the dry bones, right? Prophesy to the winds come, and there's a rattling in the valley, and the bones come together first, and then the sinews and tendons and muscle, and then flesh. Oftentimes in pastoring and in leading a church, what we want to see is we want to see the full body before we even have the bones or the structure in place, right? We want to see everything. We want to see the living organism. We want to see it working and operating. We want to be this mighty army, but we have yet to focus on the bones. The bones have to come together first. In other words, you got to build the structure first. And so as a young pastor, one of the things I had to learn was I got to catch a vision for where I see us going. You got to structure for where you want to go, right? So there's actually some places on our org chart, if you want to call it, on our structure that are still vacant. Like this is an aspirational thing. This is a visionary thing. We're going to get there one day, but we don't have the right person in that position yet. And so you got to build a structure. You got to come up with a team. You got to your host team, your door greeters, your parking team, create the structure so that when people finally start coming, when the sinews and tendons and muscles start coming, they have somewhere to attach to, somewhere to get plugged in, somewhere to get involved with. And oftentimes you're going to have an empty bone for a while. It's just going to be that way until you find the right person to come in and flex it and fill in that position. And part of building that structure is also building out the expectations. And so one thing that we have here at Reclamation Church, and that's our big emphasis on our training day that's coming up this Saturday, is communicating those expectations. One, why we do what we do, how we do what we do. And we try to keep it on one page. And we try to keep it simplified on one page because honestly, job responsibilities, duties, responsibilities, that can be multiple pages long. I mean, go look at LinkedIn and, apply for a job and you see the duties and responsibilities. It's long and that can be overly complicated. You're dealing with volunteers. Hiring staff is different, but you're dealing with volunteers. Let's make it simple. Let's just communicate the expectations, put it on one page. And we do that because when our leaders start meeting with people who want to serve, first time serves, anything like that, or people who are desiring to sign up for a team, they say, hey, here's the one page expectation to make sure we're always on the same page. That's how we communicate it. Like there's nothing else other than this one pager. And that one page of expectations details like this is going to be the demand on you. This is how many hours a week it might take for you to do. But then here's also everything that we expect from that position that you're going to be serving in. Anything from our Sparkle team, which is our cleaning team that comes in throughout the week, our janitorial team, whatever you want to call it, our lawn maintenance team, people mowing the grass, door greeters, our kids check-in team, kids volunteer teams, every position in the church, every bone in the structure has an expectation sheet. And so when people come in and fill that position, they know exactly what's expected of them.
So you've had that high turnover though. So just like, where we're at and other places, I know a lot of guys we got to build that trust with those people though, because you're giving them a part of the ministry. But if you're truly delegating, you got to turn some of this loose.
Absolutely.
How do you approach that? And how do you let your church know, hey, these people may fail, this may happen. Like what is it? How do you navigate that? What's that look like?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing, the most successful thing that worked out for us, most effective thing, that's what I'm looking for, was developing our values. These are things that I've talked about with other pastors before. I think I shared it on the ENC pastors page a couple of weeks ago. You've got to know your values. Your values help drive your identity of your church. So you have your mission, you have your vision, but what are your values? Your values help determine how your church feels. And every organization has values. Every organization has a culture, right? For example, cultural and values is why you choose other businesses over others. For example, you would probably rather fly Delta Airlines over Spirit Airlines. Why? Because the culture is better. It's more excellent. The values are better. It's the same with the church. It's the same why you visit some restaurants and don't visit other restaurants. You go to some stores and don't go to other stores because of the culture of those organizations. Even churches, whether they are defined or not, has a set of cultural values. Whether you know it or not, there's some things that you value. And so what we had to do as a leadership team, I take my leadership team away on a retreat once a year. And a few years ago, we went up to the mountains of Gatlinburg and just spent a weekend up in Gatlinburg. And I said, hey, here's culture. Here's what it means. How we define it. We need values. What do we value in our church? And, one, it helped us identify what we don't like, right? What's happening in the church that we don't like. It helped us finally identify those and be bold about calling those things out. But it also helped us to identify, who we want to be, what we want to do, what we value. And so when you have a strong set of values that help determine the direction and identity of who your church is, man, that sets the foundation to easily bring correction when needed. If somebody doesn't hit the standard, doesn't hit the mark, or they're doing something different than who you want to be as a church, your identity as a church, it's easy as, hey, that's not who we are. That's not what we do. We're joyful contributors. We get to do this, but not only do we get to do this, we want to do this. Like that's who we are. Another value is irrational generosity. We give even if it hurts because we're never closer to the heart of God than when we give. We give in this church. That's what we do. And so you can hold your leaders to that standard. You haven't been giving. Why haven't you been giving? Irrational generosity is what we do. You know what I mean? So it gives you that fallback to, it makes confrontational conversations easier. But then you also have the mindset, people are going to fail. They're going to fail. You just have to be, as a leader, you've got to be patient. You got to exercise that grace. You have to understand and know that one day they're going to fail, but help them to fail forward. Have that grace. Help them to, here's what went wrong. I entrusted it to you. You did great up until this point. Now here's how we can make this better. And I think that's the mentality, that's the mindset you have to have, is how can we do this better? And that's actually one of the main focuses of our staff meetings every Tuesday, is how can we do what we're doing better? You know, even if it's amazing right now, which to me, like, this is an incredible season for us. Like, I know everything is really good right now, but how can we make it better? And it's not to impress people, but it's to give more glory and excellence to God in how we serve in our worship and serving.
No, I like that. So you hit on something, two points I wanted to really make sure. Yeah. One is you've got your values and everything. Like you tell the people what's expected of them before they start out. You know, I think a lot of people are in jobs right now and they have no idea what they're really supposed to be doing. You know, like, I have this job and I think this is my job description and I'm doing a little bit of this. I'm not really sure. Nobody's told me to do anything different, you know. But second, something that I really wrote down, I wrote down, is when you put somebody in a position and they're afraid they're going to fail, right? There's a lot of people that want to do something, but they're, like you said, they're afraid that I might fail. I might do something wrong. I might, you know, I won't do it exactly. And I love this statement. I wrote it down, said, even if it's wrong, if it matches our values, it's right. You know, it might not be exactly in your job, but if what you're doing, if that's what your mission, vision, and values are for, that's your check right there. That's your main guideline. Does it fit with our values? Yeah. And so they may even bring a new idea to the table. If it matches our values and it's a little bit outside of your boundaries, hey, that may be something new. Yeah. But that training on them, I love that you're doing that training this weekend. You know, we've been trying to do some of that. I told my church the other day, we did a training just on greeting people at the door. I said, I know you think this is menial and this is a task but how often do you have somebody that you walk into a church and they're like right there on your face? You know what I'm saying? Or they stand in the way of the door. They're trying to be nice and greet you. You know, these are just basics that we talk about. When you open the door, step out of the way. Put a breath mint in, give them some space. You know what I'm saying? Like,
absolutely,
things that you wouldn't even normally know you talk about. So that's part of team building, is not just saying, hey, here's your job, but let's put something in your hands to teach the people that you have, to train them, to lead them. And so I love that you're doing that training. If for people that are out there to say, hey, I want to train my people, and I don't know how. Church at Highlands has some really great resources.
Absolutely.
You know, I've got I've learned a lot from them. There's a lot of stuff out there that if you don't know how to train your people on something, there's somebody that does. That's the reason we're bringing this podcast to you is, you know, Rob didn't always know this. I mean, they didn't take you through the military. They didn't say, hey, let me teach you how to do all this. I know you had a lot of great team building experience there, and I'm sure that's probably played a role in some of this. Yeah. But all of us learned some of this from somewhere. And the information,
you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Yeah.
You don't. Yeah. You don't. A lot of the things me and you talk about all the time, I can tell we listen to the same podcasts, because I can hear so many different things, and I'm like, I know where that came from, and I know where this came from. And it's and that's what makes us all stronger, is I see people that are constantly trying to write their own revitalization book or write this new, or write, and you don't have to do all that. It's amalgamation. Put it all together. What you like, what you don't, and let's move forward with it.
Right. Yeah. And eventually, you know, again, listening to podcasts, knowing the resources, everything, going through the training, eventually you have to move from knowing to doing. Yeah. Eventually you just got to bite the bullet and implement it and actually carry it out. And you're going to mess up. You're going to fail. You're going to get it wrong. You know, and just have that grace for yourself, learn from it, move on, implement the changes to make it better.
Yeah, you can't have that. I love you said, I fall forward. You know, you've got to be willing to fail, but fail trying. Yeah. So what's the first team position you think somebody needs to find? If you were going to tell somebody, if they don't have a team and they're doing it by themselves, what's the number one?
Door greeters. Get you some door greeters, get you some ushers, get you some parking people out in the parking lot. People who can maintain the grass, maintain the curb appeal, for lack of a better word. The first 7 minutes that first-time guest visits your church will make or break your church. The first 7 minutes. So basically, a first-time guest, first-time visitor decides whether they are coming back to your church for a second visit in the first 7 minutes. That's from when they pull into the property, into the parking lot, park in a parking space. That's the curb appeal. What does the building look like? Is the grass cut? Are the bushes trimmed? Is there trash everywhere? Is the building falling apart? Does it need a paint job? Does it need repairs? All those kind of things. What does the parking lot look like? Is there somebody in the parking lot greeting me? Becoming a friend with me? That's one thing that we say here. We're not just trying to be a friendly church. We're trying to be a church that makes friends. And so from the parking lot to the door greeter to sitting in a chair, have I made connection? What does the church feel like? What is the culture of the church? What is the atmosphere? That's the first 7 minutes that make the decision. That means it has nothing to do with your worship style, your style of music, whether you're traditional, redback hymn, CCM, elevation, maverick. It has nothing to do with the worship style. And thank the Lord, it has nothing to do with my preaching. I mean, those, as the service progresses, yes, those could be decision points. But usually in the first 7 minutes, how they felt from parking the car, getting out and sitting in a seat determines whether they'll come back or not. And so if you have at least those three, you have a parking lot person, a door greeter, and an usher, then you've created 3 connecting points with a first-time guest. The way we do it is the parking lot person. Now, this is sometimes aspirational because sometimes we miss the mark. Sometimes we don't do it every Sunday. Let's be real. We're dealing with people. We're dealing with volunteers, and sometimes they're gonna miss it. But ideally, the perfect Sunday would be the parking lot attendant, parking lot person greets the first time guest. We have a sign out of the road that says, "Hey, if it's your first time, turn your blinkers on so we know if you're a first time guest." We have a parking spot. We have a few parking spots that are for first time visitors. The parking lot attendant greets them. "Hey, what's your name? How did you hear about us? What do you do? What are your hobbies? What are your interests?" Just building those person-centric questions, making it all about them. We're not stealing the conversation. We're making it all about them. And now by the time they've walked from the parking lot to the door and handed that person off to a door greeter, they've found 4 or 5 connecting points. Hey, this is John. John is in the Army. He's a supply guy in the Army, but he loves playing football. And his favorite team is the Carolina Panthers. And so now we've handed that person off to the door greeter. The door greeter's like, "Oh, my favorite team is also the Panthers." And now we've started developing a conversation there. We're making friends. We're making connection points right there at the door before they even come and sit down. Now we're taking them from the door to an usher so that the usher can help them find a seat. Because sometimes, they might be walking in late and it's getting full, may not have a seat. Even if it's empty, they're still going to help walk them to a seat. And now that usher, the door greeter, has handed off the conversation to the usher. The usher is now connecting with them in a certain way. And now they're now sitting in a seat before the service has even started. And if they come early,
if they're both Carolina Panther fans, like you said, they need to be sitting there and they need all these friends because they've got to have that companionship. I hate to throw you off.
Jesus.
I couldn't resist right there because we speak to hurting people all the time. And so, if they
that's our vision, moving broken stories one step closer to Jesus.
Yeah. Poor fellas.
Yeah. And if they're here super early, our worship team, other team members of all the other volunteers, we know we don't just let anybody sit alone in the seat. Let's go talk to them. And at first glance, that can seem overwhelming, especially if they're an introvert. And we've kind of learned to navigate that too. We've had some introverts kind of come to us like, it was just too overwhelming for me. And so, I think we teach our leaders and teach our people, hey, kind of read the room. If they're kind of uncomfortable talking, just say, hey, go greet them really quick. Let's not try to overwhelm them. You know what I mean? But I mean, in that first 7 minutes, now they've made 3 friends.
There's a fine balance between being welcoming and then being that scene in Cars where the minivan and the other car pull into Radiator Springs and everybody just overwhelms them and just get, like we want to find that balance. Like you mix in with them and like you said, it's a handoff there. But so that first, I've even heard it down as far as 3 minutes. You know what I'm saying? And I think what we're trying to emphasize is how important that first impression is. Like I've got all these books on the back shelf back there, and I've got tons more in my Kindle. And I'll admit, I haven't read them all. I'll get a few pages into this and I realize I don't really agree with this author. I don't like his tone. It just doesn't sit well with me. And I'll put it down. And so if that's that big of an emphasis in our church, Like for real, if we can really buy in, and that is so much truth there about how people know if they're coming back, they're going to make it through that first service.
Right.
Why don't we put that bigger emphasis on that? Like, why aren't we really hammering out? We got to have greeters. We've got to have, and we just let that slide every Sunday.
Right.
I'll add one thing to you. One thing I've tried to do is I've put speakers outside, and I've got praise and worship music playing before you ever walk into the building. It's mood setting. You know, you feel welcomed. I think a lot of
the
people
whole dynamic outside.
It does, and I think what hinders a lot of pastors have not been a visitor in a church, if ever. Now they may have gone to a church for the first time, but they've been the pastor for as long as they can remember. They've been the leader. It's hard just being a visitor, just going to a church one time and you don't know anybody. And so those people that are willing to break that ice, man, that is a valuable team member. I like that.
That's another thing that we do too. We send our leaders, or we'll send our volunteers. Hey, go visit this church. Go visit that church. You know, and we kind of send them with a quad chart, I guess you could say. And this is something that we learned from our church in Colorado, the church plant in Colorado. And we help identify. We asked them to identify what was right, what was wrong, what was missing, and what was confusing. Matter of fact, that used to be the very core of our staff meetings. What was right, what was wrong, what was missing, what was confusing. But now we'll send our volunteers or team leaders to another church because, again, you can get complacent in your own church. And then you go somewhere new. It's like, oh, I didn't even think about doing that before. Or I never noticed that before. Are we doing the same thing? You know, is that something wrong that we're also doing wrong? Or, you know, these things are just kind of missing. Or is that missing at our church? This was really confusing pulling into the church, but nobody was here to meet me and greet me. And I don't know where to go. You know, there's no signage anywhere. And it's just confusing. And so it helps, you know, narrow down and make our efforts more excellent here too.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's cool, man. I love it. Where's Reclamation going now? What's your next step? What kind of leaders are you looking now?
Yeah, we just plugged in the last puzzle piece. We got a kids pastor a couple months ago. She's crushing it. It's sent our team way over the top. She's brought a whole level of standard of excellence to the church that now all of our team leaders are like, man, we've got to step our game up. And so we're really excited about that. We're going into the fall. Fall is historically a very strong growth season. Matter of fact, we went to 3 services back in February. We went back down to 2 just for the summer. You know, summer is one of those, the lull season. People are out vacationing, they're spending time with family, they kind of leave, go away. And so we went back down to 2 services. I honestly think that was to our detriment. We probably should have kept the 3 services. We did lose a few families that are waiting for us to relaunch that 3rd service, which we are September 15th, and they're going to be coming back. So that's going to be huge, launching that 3rd service coming up in September, supporting all of the growth that's happening. Man, we this past Sunday was Labor Day. And, you know, Labor Day should be a very low Sunday. We weren't expecting hardly anybody to be here. And the house was packed for both services with all kinds of first-time visitors. Of course, our regulars were out of town because we were expecting that. Right. But, I mean, first-time guests coming on a Labor Day weekend, that's huge. I can't imagine what the next few Sundays are going to be in September. And so we've got Back to Church Sunday is coming up September 15th. So we've got invites out of the church. We've been telling people invite 3 to 5 people. Super excitement around all of that. Everybody's stopping by the invites, getting invites on the way out, inviting people. We're going to be relaunching our 3rd service that Sunday, which is a whole different dynamic with volunteering and getting your servers there.
I can
committed.
imagine.
Yeah. And so, you know, and just on that note, you know, if you're struggling, this is to any pastor out there who feels like they're struggling with their volunteers. Volunteerism is a challenge at every level. You know what I mean? Elevation Church is going to have volunteers that are declining or not showing up. Every church has a challenge with volunteering. You're dealing with people; they're not paid; they're volunteers, and so you just have to have that in the back of your mind and navigate that. You know, going into this fall season, though, man, we're excited about it. We know God is just going to do something incredible. Our leadership team can feel it. Man, there's excitement, there's motivation. Every single one of them is like, man, God is about, they're like, it's about to open up, like heaven is about to open up here in Spring Lake. It's about to burst at the seams. So everybody can feel it. Everybody's on the same page. We're launching a series on Back to Church Sunday called Hope After Church Hurt, the book by Joe Dobbins, doing a whole series on it. And so it's definitely meeting the needs of people that are going to be coming back to church for sure.
Oh,
So it's
man.
going to be good. It's going to be good.
Yeah, that's
We're excited
exciting.
about it.
I love following what you're doing there, man. You're doing a lot of great work. You did it briefly there, but if you don't mind, speak to that pastor. That's where you were when you first stepped in. He's kind of in some unknown territory, or well, just wherever your heart leads you. Just from your experience, give him a little bit of encouragement.
Yeah, catch a vision for what God wants to do in your community, not just in your church, but in your community, and communicate that vision. Communicate the why to your church. This is what we're here for. We have words plastered on our exit doors as add value to the city. Like, don't just hold what you have here in the church. Take it out. Communicate the vision to your people. Tell them to bring that excitement to the neighborhoods, communities around you, workplaces, all of those things. Learn to communicate vision. If you can, weave the vision into every message to keep the vision at the forefront of people in the church, to help them latch onto it. And then lastly, be consistent. Man, consistency builds commitment. So if you have those values, if you have those standards, if you have those expectations, hold people to them. It'll help bring in high impact, high value leaders. It'll help attract and help keep them. If you build that consistency, it'll keep that commitment. And really, generally speaking, it's going to take about 2 years. It's going to take 2 years of consistent leadership and consistent vision casting before you see culture really unfold in your church. Coming out of COVID in 2020, we really hit our strategy. It took about a year to get those systems and processes in place. 2 years later, 2022, 2023 is really when we started seeing our culture happen in the church. One of our pastor friends said it like this: it's almost like banging your head against the wall over and over and over again. And then one day you just turn yourself around and, man, it finally happened. It sometimes it hurts. It's a challenge. It's a process. But if you stay consistent, it'll build that commitment in the church. It'll build that excitement, build those values, build the culture of your church, and just be the leader. Listen, you, as the pastor, you are the only one who can catch a vision for the church. You're the only one. Don't let anybody else drive vision. Don't let anybody else drive the values. Be the leader that God has called you to be there for this season, for right now. Be you, man, and be consistently you.
I like that. And that's coming from a guy that took over from his dad. You had to come in and be yourself, not another version of him. You were, you and Adrian are truly yourselves over there. You have your own identity, really, and I mean that in a great way. You don't try and be somebody else. You're who God created you to be, and so we're thankful for that, man. Thank you so much for doing this. I know there's been some great information, and I hope some people, if you do this, some things work. Please let us know. If you have any questions, Rob is always out there, man. Look this guy up on Facebook, get to know him, see what he's doing. He's constantly sharing the knowledge that he has. So we would love to share any information we can, any resources we have. So thank you so much for watching this far. Hope it's helped you. And Rob, again, thank you, man. I really enjoyed it.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me.
Have a good day, everybody.